morning, good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are dialing in and watching the video. I appreciate you dialing in for another one of our topics of the Bible, or people of the Bible, as this one will be today. If you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to hit us up over on our Facebook page at Webb Baptist, or go to our website at webbaptist.com, or leave your comment in the description below or in the comments below. Like and subscribe to the video and the channels. That way, every time a video is made, you'll be notified of when these come out. So going forward, we'll get right into it. Today, we're talking about Ishmael and what this guy was all about. And he is kind of a side story in the main, one of the main topics right now in the Sunday school series that we're going through. He's kind of on the periphery. He's kind of a side note to what God is doing through Abraham. Okay, so we look at Ishmael, and we're going to go through, and I got the chapters kind of outlined and very brief. As always, go through and read the Bible for yourself to get the details and the truth on your own. Do a lot of your own digging. So we look in Genesis 15. God had appeared to Abraham and promised he would have a son, and he would have he'd be the father of many nations. And Abraham was getting up in his years, okay, and time had passed, a long time had passed, and Abraham was kind of worried about it. And his wife, she's not able to conceive, okay, so there was that problem. And they were wondering, time after time after time, when am I going to have a child? What is he talking about, an heir, when we can't have children? So fast forward to Genesis 16, and what we see is Sarah suggests to Abraham that, hey, use my maidservant, use her, get her pregnant, and she will have you an heir. Now, that doesn't mean that Sarah was stepping aside as being the matriarch of the family and the clan, so to speak. It meant that, it was custom back in those days that a maidservant would be used to produce an heir for the patriarch of the family and the clan. So this was a custom. It wasn't something a little bit outrageous. It was just something that was a custom that was done whenever the wife of the man, of the chief and the king, so to speak, could not produce an heir. Well, then they'll step in with a servant. So that was not unusual, and it was somewhat of a common practice back then. But bottom line is, Hagar got pregnant. And Hagar treated Sarah with disdain because now she had the child and Sarah didn't. Of course, Sarah was upset. She gets an argument with Abraham, and it causes more problems than it solved. So Abraham was like, "Look, she's your maidservant. Do whatever you want with her." So that is what was going on there. So then it's Genesis 16. We're looking for 6. She did conceive a child for Abraham. And and she was, for the most part, she was, Sarah was kind of mistreating her, and Hagar ran away. But the angel of the Lord, found Hagar out in the desert and told her to return to Sarah, rightfully so, under her protection. And she told her about her yet unborn son. He said, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery." Okay, Ishmael means God hears. "He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility towards all of his brothers." So, Hagar goes back and bore a son to Abraham, and Abraham was around 86 years old when that happened. So if I'm Hagar and I hear that my son's going to be a wild donkey of a man, it's kind of, I don't know how to take that. But the success of her son being a father of a nation is definitely interesting and worth the trip back, I guess. So now Genesis 17, Abraham was approximately, he was about 99 years old when God said, appeared to him again and said, "You're going to have a child. And this time you're going to have a child with Sarah." yeah, you're going to have a child, and he kind of gets into more details. His name is changed from Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, and God's putting the wheels into motion to get this started, so to speak. And of course, Abraham, by this time, Ishmael's about, 13 years old, and he's asking, what's going on? What's going to happen to Ishmael? Well, my covenant was with you, not Ishmael. Ishmael's going to be taken care of, but don't worry about it. So he loved Ishmael. Don't get me wrong, as a father should. Abraham, he was his seed. He was his child, even though it came from Hagar and not Sarah. It's obvious that Abraham had a concern, but the covenant was with Abraham, and that covenant was with Abraham and Sarah, and not with the handmaiden. Ishmael was kind of a byproduct of Abraham and Sarah's impatience. They were trying to force God's hand and not listening to his will. Okay, so that alone is why he's not part. God never had a design for Ishmael in regards to the Abrahamic covenant that he made, the permanent covenant that he made with Abraham. So that's very important. Okay, and God tells him in Genesis 17 that Sarah's going to have the child. So, wow, that's pretty interesting. So, and then we look in Genesis 21. Sarah's son Isaac is born, and then problems arise. We see that Sarah sees Ishmael mocking him, the young Isaac, and she demands Abraham, "Hey, do something about it." Well, you have to get rid of that slave woman, or that slave woman would never share the inheritance of the son of Isaac. So Sarah's kind of at a position now. She has a son. She wants to protect her son. And her rival, so to speak, and her biggest problem and the kid's biggest threat happens to be Ishmael. And Ishmael seems to be either doesn't care or holds Isaac in somewhat of a disdain, because it's kind of obvious to everybody in the family and everybody in the tribe that Ishmael is not going to be the heir. The heir is born, and that is Isaac. And everybody looks at Ishmael as a bastard child. So that's fact. So Hagar probably felt bereft, robbed, cheated. So there's a lot of discord and seeds of hostility, even, and a lot of bad feelings just under the surface because of all this. So now, Abraham, of course, didn't want to get rid of Ishmael because that's his son. And I kind of blame him. I don't blame him for that, And here your wife is telling you to get rid of your bastard child. But the bottom line is Sarah was the one that started this to begin with. So it's kind of crazy when we see this, how all this unfolds. But then God, it was to a point that it disturbed Abraham so greatly that God told him, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of Ishmael. He's not going to die. I'm going to bless him. You just got to focus on Isaac." Okay? So Abraham, he loves his son. He gives them a bunch of provisions and sends Hagar and Ishmael on their way. He pretty much frees them to go wherever they want. And could he have done that better? Probably. He could have given them some livestock, maybe some servants of their own. Who knows? Why he just gave them enough food on their backs to survive, I don't know. But he did. And he trusted God. And I think part of that, if I answer my own question, is I think he knew God blessed him when he had nothing. And he probably felt that it doesn't matter what he gave Hagar and Ishmael, that God is going to bless them greatly regardless. So and it's part of Abraham's faith. He trusted God completely to stay by his word and to be honest with his word and be accountable. So when God told him not to worry about it, Abraham's like, good, I'm not going to worry about it. His heart was probably all distressed and bundled, but he was still faithful and obedient to God. So they go out, and once the provisions are exhausted, Hagar and Ishmael were overcome with grief, assuming they would die in the desert because this is where they were. God heard the boy cry, and the angel called Hagar from the heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift up the boy and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes and saw a well of water. So he went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Once again, God appeared to Hagar, promised that Ishmael would be a great nation. Finally, we are told that God was with the boy as he grew up, and he lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mom got a wife for him from Egypt. Now, that's pretty much all we, for the most part, we know about Ishmael. So now in Genesis 25, upon Abraham's death, we hear that he came back. Now, obviously, Abraham left everything to Isaac, but Ishmael did come back to help his half brother bury Abraham. So that is a footnote where maybe feelings may have been put aside, or he was doing it out of the honor of his father. He went back and helped bury his father Abraham. So now in Genesis 25, 12 through 18, we have a list of the descendants of Ishmael. And this is probably the most important part of Ishmael. So we know that Ishmael was the son of Abraham, but he was not part of the covenant that God was making with Abraham. But nonetheless, because of the covenant that God made with Abraham, where God was talking that he would bless him and he would curse those who cursed him, and he would bless those who blessed him, and he would have a covenant, and he would take care of Abraham, and he would take care of his descendants, and they would be a blessing going forward. God upheld that covenant to Ishmael separately, but because of his connection with Abraham, Ishmael benefited from that. As we see, the angel of the Lord told Hagar, "Look, a great nation is going to come out of your son." At the time, it probably didn't seem that way. Now, the scripture doesn't tell me this, but he became a successful archer, a very good archer. So he's a very good hunter. His mother would get him a wife out of Egypt. And as we will see in Genesis 25, he has like 12 descendants. I think he's had 12 sons, and I think there was 3 girls with a second wife or something. But for the most part, so he was successful in his lifetime. Now, how that lived, he was probably more of a nomad. When we think of success, we're thinking of houses, businesses, and that kind of stuff in today's modern thinking. But back then, it's probably more of land and livestock and moving around and having wealth, but not the wealth that we're thinking of. We're thinking of wealth being a big family that becomes a clan that eventually becomes a nation. And that's what we will see throughout history. So if we look at Genesis 25, 12 through 18, lists of the descendants of Ishmael, they are indeed numerous, divided into 12 tribes. That sounds familiar. And as God has earlier revealed, they lived in hostility towards the tribes related to them. Ishmael lived a total of 137 years. So he dies an old man, a very successful, prominent person. Now, who is the nation and what was going on? Well, long story short, the nations that come from Ishmael, the ones that border on the nation of Isaac. So we see that it pretty much comes from that. Genesis 25 is the last mention of Ishmael as an individual. However, descendants continue to mention in relations to Israel. Okay, so when there's trouble with Israel, that's when you see some of the mention of Ishmael's descendants. So Esau marries a descendant of Ishmael since his mother did not want him to marry a Canaanite woman. That was in Genesis 28, 6-8, and then 36:8. Ishmaelites are mentioned as a people or group in Genesis 37. Joseph's brothers sold him into Ishmaelite traders who took him to Egypt as a slave. Ishmaelites are mentioned incidentally a few more times in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament is silent about him. Ishmael is not upheld as any example either to be followed or avoided. So for the most part, outside of Genesis, we really don't not much. There was not much concern, rightly so, because the Bible focuses on God's people. And those people that come in and out of contact with his people, whether to be blessed or cursed, is when they're mentioned. So it wouldn't make any sense for the Bible to mention any nation that really had no direct effect on what was unfolding historically that would eventually lead up to the cross. So now we look at Genesis 25. The Bible lists Ishmael's sons, and I'm going to try these names: Nebaioth, Kedar, Abdil, Mitsam, Mishnah, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. Okay, so you got that. So you can go back to Genesis 25 and you can see those names. Now, if we look at the descendants of Ishmael, there was like 1, 2, 3, 4 that were actually that would prosper and become clans that would eventually become nations or big territories of people. And the most notable is Nebaioth. Nebaioth possibly associated with the historical Nabateans, okay, of the Hellenistic and Roman times. Okay. Kedar is associated with the Kedarites, which is usually the Transjordan, Judea, Negev, and Sinai Peninsula. They were traders, they traded in a lot of goods, and they were businessmen, and they would be eventually absorbed into the Nabatean Empire and people and culture. Okay, Duma associated with the territory of Edom in the Negev region. Okay, Massa associated with the nomadic tribe in the inhabiting the Arabian desert towards Babylonia. So that's kind of to the east, a little bit further east of the territories we've been talking about. But the bottom line is most of these, if not all of these, would be eventually absorbed into other territories and lands and peoples. Okay, but those people would eventually be part of these areas that become a Greek nations that surround, and that's to this day. So the area of Havilah, where Ishmael's descendants lived, is in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Shur is a wilderness area between Beersheba and the Negev Desert and Egypt. So, and those areas, and like I said, I'm going to try to show a map, is where these descendants kind of proliferated and spread out and migrated and grew and expanded and procreated and became the peoples of these territories. Okay, whether they were absorbed or they were the people and they absorbed other cultures, it doesn't. You can take that either way. Bottom line is they had a very lasting effect on the peoples, the cultures, and the nations of that area. So now we look at Isaiah 60 verse 7 mentions the descendants of Nebaioth and Kedar as those who raise flocks. So we're looking at kind of nomads. This is probably the same. This is the same thing that Abraham was doing when he was called. So they were basically nomads. For the beginning, the descendants of Ishmael were a warlike people as they lived in hostility towards other tribes related to them. We pretty much know that. So that fulfills God's word that earlier spoken in Genesis, that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man. Remember that? His hand would be against everyone and everybody's hand would be against. So he pretty much was a thorn in everyone's side, was he not? And his descendants would be the same way. Now, later on, those who settled in the Arabian Peninsula as well, including descendants of Kedar's son, Abraham's second wife, as we see in 1 Chronicles 1, 32, 33, and some of Esau's descendants, among them were the Amalekites. Okay, so some of these names get kind of tongue twisted on. So we see that Ishmael was okay. He was taken care of. Obviously, he didn't have he had a successful life after his dismissal by Abraham, and his descendants were indeed they raised to be a great nation. Now, where's that great nation today? Well, Um, it could be. It could be a lot of places. You know, a lot of theories, popular theories among Muslims and some Christians that Arabian Muslims are direct descendants of Ishmael. Um, the fact is, Muhammad was a major proponent of this idea, claiming to be a descendant of Ishmael according to the Quran. There is more likely some truth to this theory. Old records clearly link the northern Arabians with Ishmael's descendants, but it's unlikely that all of those in Arabia are descendants of Ishmael, as they are descendants of Keturah and the children of Esau who lived in the Arabian Peninsula. And I think a lot of God knows who is a descendant and who's not. Through the dust and dirt of history, it's hard for us to keep up with that lineage. You see how hard it was for them to keep up with the lineage of Jesus when we look at the Gospels. But as far as just the normal people and living today, that's a very hard thing to do. There's so many changes in that area of the world. However, God was true to his word when he said that they would be successful and they would rise up and be a great nation. So now, the Islamic lore reports that Abraham took Hagar and Ishmael to Mecca, and Ishmael is considered a patriarch of Islam. While it's not accurate to say that all Arabs are descended from Ishmael, many probably are. There's still a great deal of strife between descendants of Isaac, Jews, and those who see Ishmael as their father, Arabs. So we kind of see that in modern history. We see that conflict between Jewish and Arab states, do we not? And I really believe that the descendants of both Isaac and Ishmael, we're seeing that playing out today between the state of Israel and the neighbors. We really are. So, last footnote. Josephus in the Jewish Antiquities, 12:4, they list the sons born of Ishmael as well. So that's in there. And they occupied the whole country extending from the Euphrates to the Red Sea and called it Nabatee. As it is these who conferred their names to the tribe of the Arab nations and of its tribes. So, so we see, and this Josephus's record was also expressed by Milan and Origen, who were historians that followed after, and then later on by Eusebius and Jerome, according to church history. So Josephus's word was pretty much taken as gospel in regards to Ishmael, as he traced those descendants to that modern day region there that we were talking about. So that's pretty much Ishmael and his descendants and what happened. And like I said, we're seeing that played out today in a historical historical sense, as well as in a prophetical, prophecy. We're seeing all that play out. We're seeing God's word being true to his word, being obvious and being accurate as spoken by God at that time. Now, I'm like everybody. What would happen if Abraham would have waited on the Lord, and Abraham and Sarah didn't take it upon themselves to jump the gun, so to speak, and have a child on their own with the servant without thinking and without talking to God? They were kind of impatient. Well, we can sit there and we can what if all day, but the bottom line is Ishmael happened, okay? But out of that mistake that they made, God had made it for good. Now, how does he make it a good if he was a wild donkey of a man and he would always be a terror to his brothers and to his neighbors? Well, again, that goes to fulfill the prophecy. That shows in many times in history and in the judgment in the later portions of the Old Testament, we see where those nations were used to judge God's children who violated their covenant with God, and then judgment had to be passed, and God would sometimes use these neighbors against his people. Okay, So where we mess up and we make those kind of mistakes without waiting on God, God still has his plan, and his plan will ultimately come to fruition. Okay? All right, thank you for watching the video. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you dialing in. If you have any questions or comments, hit us up over the Facebook page or go to our website, leave a message over there, or just leave a comment in the video below. Like and subscribe to the channel and the videos, and you'll be notified every time that we do a video here. And if you can come to Webb Baptist, join us here for fellowship. We have a good service on Sunday mornings, and then we have the fellowship and Bible study and the dinner on Wednesday night, which is great food. And if you can't make it to Webb Baptist, I ask you and I plead with you, please get involved in a Bible-based church wherever you're at. Get plugged in and start learning and working and just studying your Bible and being with your church family. I guarantee you they will be a huge blessing to you as you will be a blessing to them. Okay? Until next time, take care and God bless.